Welcome to Red 35, and today we are at the majestic location, the Greenwich Park, looking at the current Olympus flagship, the EM-1 Mark II.
I've been feeling so small. Watch the clock ticking off the wall, but tonight I'm letting it go. Spend my coin for sure. I'm gonna be myself, or I could be someone else. No one's stopping me now. I'm gonna skip my breaks, I'm gonna make mistakes.
Well, as you know, the EM-1 Mark II is a jam-packed camera, and to make a review is very difficult, and we actually tried it 4 times, and after a year we thought we might be in a good position to finally review this. As you know, that the EM-1 Mark II was originally announced at the Photokina in 2016, and I was very curious about it. And actually, at the same time, I was still a Canon and Leica professional photographer, and which means I'm actually shooting a professional for over 10 years. So I wasn't too sure about the Micro Four Thirds system for professional use, although that I might have mentioned it before. You know, I've been using the EM-5 Mark II for personal use, but I was never considering this as a system for professional purposes. However, you know, I was fortunate enough to get invited by Olympus to go to Ronda in Spain to test this particular camera, and I'm telling you now, this camera was so impressed me that it kind of changed my life. As you know, that Olympus has designed and built the EM-1 Mark II for professional use, so it has to be rugged and withstand some sort of environmental elements like the heavy rain that we are just experiencing right now. When I said the Olympus EM-1 Mark II changed my life, I meant it. Let me give you a few reasons. Let's start with the size and weight, and I can tell you straight away, you know, a lot of you guys may argue that, you know, the EM-1 Mark II isn't exactly a small camera. Well, it is and it isn't. You know, when you compare to the likes of the Pen F, for instance, or even the EM-5 Mark II, it's certainly a lot bigger and a little bit heavier. But when you're comparing to what I used to use, like the Canon 5D series, or even like the Nikon D700 series or the 800 series, this is, you know, at least half the size and weight altogether. Coupled with the pro lenses, you know, you all know how big those lenses are. You know, the 50 1.2L lens, or even the 85 1.2L lenses, they are massive, and like they're all over a kilo in terms of weight. And this is the whole thing is just over a kilo. You know, compared to that, it's only lens only, which is a lot smaller. And now I can fit everything that I need for a professional shoot in something like this. This is actually my shooting bag, my working bag. So imagine that, you know, I used to have to hold the trolleys. I mean, it really is a change, life-changing. The second thing I'm talking about is the image stabilization, and this single feature alone really changed my creative photography. I can tell you that because you know, some of the purists may not agree with me because you know, they like to do things the old-fashioned way, which I do still, and but the image stabilization alone helped me to create some of the shots that I couldn't do before without having a tripod around me. And sometimes as a location photographer, portrait photographer, wedding photographer, having a tripod around can be a little bit more cumbersome, you know, to set up, and you need time to do this and that. You know, it's not always easy. But now with this, you know, I can actually stop it down and then also basically have some motion blur around my subject, which is actually quite an interesting concept, and it certainly makes the photo more interesting visually. So this is really just amazing. You know, this is something that I, you know, could do it before, but without, you know, I have to have at least 15 minutes to set up everything that I need to do. Now I can do it in seconds. The third thing I want to talk about is the silent shutter option. And I know this is not an exclusive feature on the Olympus system, but, you know, it's something that actually changed my photography in general, because I used to shoot with a lot of fast prime lenses on my Canon and even my Leica system, and when I use them, because of the mechanical limits of the shutter, you know, on the DSLR was 8,000 a second, on my Leica it's only 4,000 a second, so it's actually quite slow. If you really want to use a really fast prime, you have to put on an ND filter. These days I could barely touch my ND filters because I don't need to. Putting on the a silent shutter, you can actually use up to 25th a thousand second. That means I could actually use 1.2 on bright daylight, which actually changed everything that I do. The fourth things I want to talk about is PROCAPTURE. And Olympus originally designed this for like action photography that is faster than human reaction. For instance, you know, like if you want to capture a bullet shooting through a watermelon, and you know, a normal human being probably would be too slow to capture that kind of shot without having an optical trigger. So this is something that is really changing a lot of different like action photography. But for me, as a wedding and portrait photographer, this is not something that I thought I would use it, but in fact I actually did end up using it for a couple of occasions. For instance, you know, like for the bride and groom jumping, you know, if I want to capture the moment when they both have the perfect facial expressions, and also when they're both up in the air, this is valuable. And because, you know, like a lot of time, you know, that if I count to 1, 2, 3, they may not jump at the same time. But having PROCAPTURE means that, you know, I could actually nail that exact moment that I would call it the perfect shot, and then keep it. Of course, you know, I wouldn't be able to use it all the time because that would be silly. Well, as you can tell, that we just did a little bit of shopping because we have to get something to keep us dry. Although this is no problem. Well, as you can see, that the weather is certainly not very majestic right now. But I want to talk about how much, well, what I like about this particular camera, the Olympus EM-1 Mark II. First of all, I like it because it's size and weight, I've mentioned before, but it's the actual overall handling and the speed, right? When Olympus introduced camera, they talked about speed, and when I first tried out in Ronda, it was the speed that actually shocked me the most. You know, I have used Canon cameras before, and they are, you know, their autofocus system was actually one of the best in the world. But when I picked this up, you know, when I started to focus something, it really shocked me how quickly it actually acquired, you know, the actual focus point. So that was actually something that I really want to praise about Olympus, you know, because you have to think about, you know, from a mirrorless point of view, the market has only, you know, been around for a few years, and you can just see how quickly the whole autofocus speed has advanced in the last few years. And the EM-1 Mark II, it really is one of the best at the moment, especially they have hybrid focus. Many of you may not know that, but majority of the mirrorless cameras that you use these days, Panasonic and other systems, you know, like they are mostly contrast-based detect, which means that they have to look for some high contrast scenes to get the focus. But the traditional DSLRs, they use the phase detect, which is slightly different technology. It's more accurate and it's more better in low light situations. And the EM-1 Mark II actually has hybrid, which means that it actually has two systems in one, which is good. Well, for a start, you know, you've seen some of my previous review. I was using a legacy 35-100 f2 lens, which was designed for the DSLR, and this can use it no problem because it has the phase detection AF as well, which means that, you know, it focuses accurately, perfectly. So I think this is probably one of the best about the EM-1 series. Even Mark I has that, and Mark II is improved on it. The AF now cover 80%, 85% of the entire coverage, which is actually really good. So it really is something that I enjoy shooting. Another thing I like about the EM-1 Mark II, or actually mirrorless in general again, is the ability to see the exposure while you're shooting. So like, you know, traditional DSLRs, you know, they're using optical viewfinder, so which means that it's basically a mirror box, seeing everything that you see through the lens. But with EVF, you can simulate exactly, you know, how it looks like in the final photo, like in terms of depth of field, also in terms of exposure, so you can actually adjust accurately on the fly. With something I know to some people, you know, I actually did say that before, you know, it's a lazy way of doing things, but it does help me a lot in terms of getting things accurately very quickly, especially if you really don't want to waste time on bracketing, for instance. This is pretty awesome. You know, this is another thing I like about the mirrorless Olympus. Mirrorless cameras in general, I can tell you that, you know, like battery life sucks, you know, and I'm not joking. EM-5 Mark II, Pen F, EM-10, you know, if you haven't seen those reviews, you know, you should check them out, because you know, they don't last long. You know, in terms of just photos, you know, you're only taking about like 200-300 photos and you have to change batteries. EM-1 Mark II, on the other hand, is one of the first mirrorless camera to actually embrace using a bigger battery, and I actually have no idea why manufacturers don't do that, you know, earlier, because, you know, the body is big already, you know, like they actually have rooms to actually put bigger batteries. So the EM-1 Mark II has a more chunkier, more beefier, juicier battery, and now it lasts a lot longer. And for something that I use every day, you know, like I only need to carry 2 batteries, you know, at max. There's more than enough to shoot, you know, a couple of thousands of photos minimum. And for videos, you know, it does, you know, last quite long as well, which is actually something I am quite happy about using the EM-1 Mark II these days, because I don't have to worry about carrying a dozen batteries every time. I know it doesn't sound like a big deal, and many of the pro cameras now have dual card slot, but for mirrorless, you know, EM-1 in 2016, it was one of the first to actually introduce the dual card slot for, you know, on the Micro Four Thirds platform. And I think even today, if you check, don't quote me on this, but if you check it, I think the EM-1 Mark II still holds one of the fastest card writing, which is very important, speed for the UHS-2, that's quite important, because if you're doing a lot of high-speed shooting in RAW, you need a very fast writing speed. And I know, you know, these days people actually don't advertise the speed of writing, and they all just quote UHS-2, but it's actually important to know that the fastest writing machine is actually better. As you can imagine, you know, you write the card faster, that means you clears the buffer quicker, you can shoot longer and faster. However, the card slot 2 is still UHS-1. I'm hoping, you know, that's something that's going to change. Billingham is waterproof. I don't understand this. How come walking up is quicker than rolling downhill? Doesn't make sense. One last thing I like about the EM-1 Mark II is ruggedness. It's build quality, so to speak. You know, I have no complaint about build quality. I've mentioned it many times about Olympus products. This is no difference. This actually builds like Tang, and I meant it because I have dropped this camera a couple of times on concrete floors. And apart from a few lost paints, and it's fine. I've been using it ever since. No problem. Because I'm catching my breath. I'm definitely not as fit as I thought I was. I need more exercise. Ta-da! We made it. This is the views. I feel like Rocky at the moment. Ta-da-da! Ta-da-da! There are a few things I don't like about the EM-1 Mark II, and I'm hoping Olympus is going to look at these issues and address them in the next version of the camera. And first of all, it's the autofocus speed. I know earlier I talked about how much I love the speed of the AF, but it's also because of the speed of the AF, it sometimes overshoots the subject that I'm trying to focus on. It's simple because the in contrast detect mode, you know, like how it works is going back and forth, you know, until to the point that the camera actually detects the contrast and stops where the AF is confirmed. But sometimes these things switch so fast when you press the the shutter button, you know, it's just too quick, you know, it overshoots the people a little bit, and that means you miss the focus and resulting slightly soft image. It's not a frequent thing that I experience, and certainly is not bothering me too much, but it does happen, and I'm sure there are a lot of the EM-1 Mark II users actually also saying the same thing. Then the second thing is obviously the face and eye detection. There is a feature like this, you can select it on the menu, but it doesn't always work. It certainly tracks the face, but in terms of eye, you know, unless you go really close, and it's nowhere the system can tell where the eye actually is. So that's something is not quite on par with some of the latest competition these days. So I'm hoping they can, you know, bring up the AF system, you know, in terms of that particular feature. And of course, now come to the big question, is the ISO and low light capabilities. This thing is pretty good. The hybrid AF does work in low light, but sometimes it's still a little bit slow and soft when it comes to the low light shooting. And of course, also in ISO as well, you know, if they can improve the low light sensitivity, noise level for both still and video, that would be great. Of course, I totally understand that, you know, we're not comparing the micro four thirds and full frame. You know, you cannot defy physics, you know, like smaller sensor really is different to big sensor in that sense. But that's another thing I don't like about it, is the peaking. I mean, I certainly like using it because when you're using manual focus, it's a very important feature to confirm the focus. But sometimes when you're shooting at a wide scene, for instance, the peaking will tell you everything's in focus, everything lit up, you know, nice and bright. You think, oh, that's everything in focus. But when you go back home and check things on screen, and you realize that is actually not. So that's something I think the Olympus will need to address critically, because sometimes it will mean that you miss focus even though the system tells you it's actually in focus. It's hard to tell either on the EVF or the back screen because it's quite small. It's really hard to tell in that regard, and so this is something I think they need to look into it. One last thing is the UHS card slot. The card 2 slot is only UHS 1. I mentioned it earlier, you know, if they can bring it up to UHS 2, same speed as the card slot 1, that would be brilliant. I cannot finish talking about this camera without mentioning about the video side of it, and simply because, you know, these days whatever camera you look at, they always have some kind of video capturing capabilities, and the EM-1 Mark II is no exception. It has a very impressive video capturing features that many people actually ignore. For a start, you know, it has 4K capturing, you know, in 30 frames per second. It has a cine profile, which is 24 frames per second, and also the normal 1080, 30 frame and 60 frames per second, which is actually quite good to do half speed, even though it hasn't got super slow-mo. But this is something that I want to talk about, and also the superb stabilization, which is, I think, sometimes quite insane that you don't have to use a gimbal anymore. This is quite good for running gun, also for vlogging purposes. If you haven't seen some of my vlogs, here's the link. But apart from that, you know, there are a few things I would like to see Olympus improve in the next version. First of all is the ISO, you know, or the low light performance of this camera. Similar to still, you know, I'm hoping, you know, the noise level will be a lot cleaner in shooting anything above 1600, because at the moment I think it's slightly lagging behind compared to the current rifle, the GH5 and 5S, or even the G9. And also is the flat profile, you know, like even though it has a cine profile which is slightly flatter than normal, but it's still not flat where you can actually grade your footage properly. So these two things I'm hoping that they can improve in the next version. Certainly if we have that, it will be quite cool, but we're quite happy, otherwise we wouldn't be using for YouTube.
Frames of the past and the memory of you just come running by. Pictures of sunny days with your smile in the bar.
So how would I rate this Olympus EM-1 Mark II? And I can tell you in 3 words, I love it. And I don't just say it because I use it a lot, and I genuinely do, because it actually changed the way I work. And I mentioned some of the things I like about it, and also how it changed my photography, because it really makes my life a lot easier. Not only just, it doesn't kill my neck and back anymore, but it just overall experience of shooting it. Shooting experience is something that you cannot look lightly on, because just like rangefinder, my Leica, that's a shooting experience. Full frame is another experience. Micro Four Thirds is actually another shooting experience. For my type of work, I do a lot of documentary, a lot of weddings and things like that. Micro Four Thirds is actually a very good platform, and I'm gonna do this in a separate video, because this is a review of this camera, but it's really good for my work. I really do like it, and it's just really suitable for all kinds of things that I do in general. And being such a feature-packed camera, that we've taken us over a year and 4 attempts trying to do this review, and we still barely touch most of the feature that this camera has. The menu is about this thick, by the way, and it certainly delivers something that I think Olympus has done something really great for different type of photographers, whether you're a wildlife photographer, landscape, macro photographers, or underwater, it's definitely something quite awesome. And I'm hoping the next generation is going to be another wow for us, and I just cannot wait to see what's next. Well, thank you for watching our latest video, and if you really like it, please do the thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please click the button right there if you haven't already done so. And remember, turn on the notification so you know when our new video is coming out. Until next time, see you then, bye! So if you look at the EM-1 series, both the Mark I and this Mark II here, it certainly shapes very differently, compared to all the original Olympus mirrorless cameras like the Pen series or the OMD cameras like EM-5 and EM-10. These things shape more like a traditional DSLR with bigger grips, which a lot of the professionals actually prefer, because most of the time they will use much bigger lenses and heavier lenses. For instance, if you want to hold like a 40 to 150 2.8 zoom, even though that lens is not particularly big, but it's still big for the camera. So a big grip will certainly help in terms of handling, and certainly pros will enjoy having that secure feeling as well, like I do. And saying that, mirrorless is a lot lighter than DSLR, hence that also comes to the advantage of in terms of handling. For this, in combination with the bigger grip and lightweight, I can hold this camera and shooting all day without having to feel exhausted or tiring, unlike my older Canon system, where I will get tired after about an hour or so if I use a really big heavy lens like the 85 1.2 L lens. So there you go, handling is brilliant. I have absolutely no complaint about that at all. The EM-1 Mark II certainly feels great in the hand. One of the interesting aspects of the EM-1 Mark II is image quality, and I can tell you straight away now, and I have been using the EM-1 Mark II for the last 14 months on a daily basis for all my professional pay jobs, some personal stuff, but I can tell you that that I have no complaint whatsoever about the image quality. It certainly delivers for the professional standards. None of my clients ever complained, and I can tell you that now. I used to shoot with Canon full frame and also Leica as well, and compared to those files, I can tell you that there isn't that much difference. The look has a little bit difference because obviously lenses, the rendering is very different. The full frame depth of field compared to Micro Four Thirds is different, so it really depends on the focal length and the distance to your subjects that changes it. But apart from that, if you're just looking at the file itself, I'm very happy. The dynamic range, to be quite honest, is actually slightly better than Canon. That's my own experience. Don't quote me on that. People might say differently, but to me, I genuinely love the actual EM-1 Mark II files. very nice, very contrasty, very the sensor has very high resolving power as well, you know, which is very good. Compared to more modern rifles like the Panasonic G9, I can tell you that the G9 has slightly better highlight retention, which means the bright area is less likely to get blown out, which to some people may be useful, but I don't see the difference being, you know, huge. The EM-1 Mark II is certainly not very far behind, and in terms of shadow areas, very comparable. The noise level is very similar. Yeah, I just think that it's very good. It stacks up very well in 2018, and even though this is, you know, already like been what 16 months now, the camera, so it's okay. You know, I certainly think this is a professional camera, and the image quality definitely delivers, as you can see from all my images. Welcome to Red 35, and today we are at the majestic location North Greenwich Park. North Greenwich, it's Greenwich Park. Okay, ready? Welcome to Red 35, and today we are at the majestic location, the Greenwich Park, in a not so majestic weather, looking at the majestic camera of the Should I say this is the 4th time we're recording it?
I'm gonna make mistakes. I'm gonna be myself.
As you know that the EM-5 Mark II...
EM-5 Mark II?
EM-1 Mark II. This is so nice and small, and hey, look at that, so light. Okay, when I say it changes my life, because it really makes the difference in terms of, you know, come on, man. I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. Right, ready? There are a few things that I would hoping, you know, in the next version of the EM-1 Mark II. The next version of EM-1 Mark II.
Nothing can break me, no, nothing can break me.